Imagine a room sealed from the inside. The door locked, the windows bolted shut, the chain across the handle untouched. No signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no footprints, no way in and no way out. And yet, lying on the floor, in a pool of blood already beginning to dry, is a man whose life ended violently. His throat cut deep, as if by the hands of a phantom. A crime scene that mocks every investigator who dares to look at it. A murder that should have been impossible, but wasn't. The police were the first to arrive. They expected an accident, maybe a medical collapse. But what they found was a nightmare. A corpse in the middle of the room, eyes wide open in terror, his last moments carved into his expression. On the bedside table, a glass of water, half empty. The curtains drawn, the air heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves held the secret. And the most chilling part? There were no fingerprints, no weapon, no trace of anyone else ever being there. Detectives knew they weren't dealing with a simple murder. This was something else. Something designed to confuse, to taunt, to play with the very rules of reality. And for days, the question haunted them. How can someone be killed inside a room no one could enter? The victim's name was Daniel Cross, 42 years old, a successful accountant with no criminal ties, no known enemies, and a routine life that left little room for danger. His neighbors described him as quiet, polite, always punctual. Not the kind of man you'd expect to find butchered in his own home. But perhaps that's the point. Evil doesn't always strike where you expect it. Sometimes it chooses the last person you'd ever suspect. The night of his death, Daniel was seen entering his apartment at exactly 9:17 p.m. Security cameras showed him walking through the lobby alone, carrying a briefcase. The doorman confirmed he greeted him on his way in. No one followed. No one entered after him. And yet, less than 3 hours later, his body was discovered, slaughtered in a place that should have been safe. The front door was locked from the inside. Deadbolt, chain, everything. The only window in the apartment was closed, the latch still intact. No fire escape, no roof access. No way anyone could have gotten in or out without leaving a trace. And yet, someone had. Investigators tore the apartment apart, inch by inch. They searched for hidden panels, secret passages, even drilled into the walls looking for some kind of trick. Nothing. No sign of tampering, no mechanical devices, no clever illusions. Just 4 walls, a locked door, and a corpse. The room was a prison, and somehow it had become a tomb. Theories began to swirl. Some whispered about a suicide staged as murder. But the wound was too deep, too precise, and at an angle no human could inflict on themselves. Others suggested Daniel had let his killer in willingly, only for them to lock the door from the inside before escaping. But that left a problem. How did they get out? The crime scene was mocking them with silence. The strangest clue lay on the glass of water. Half empty, untouched fingerprints. Daniel's DNA was on the rim, but no one else's. Investigators tested it for poison, for sedatives, anything that might explain what happened. The results came back clean, just water. But still, the glass seemed to watch them, as though it knew the answer they were missing. Then came the neighbors' testimonies. Around 10:30 that night, one resident swore they heard footsteps, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth above their ceiling. But Daniel's apartment was on the top floor. There was no one above him. Another neighbor claimed they heard whispers, faint, like a conversation, but only one voice clearly belonged to Daniel. The other? Low, distorted, almost inhuman. Forensic teams kept returning to the body. The cut across Daniel's throat was clean, surgical, as if done by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But there were no defensive wounds, no bruises on his arms, no signs he fought back. As though he stood there, silent, and allowed it to happen. But why? By the end of the first week, the case had already begun to eat away at the investigators. Reporters circled the building, calling it the impossible murder. Headlines screamed about ghosts, demons, supernatural forces. The public ate it up, feeding on every bizarre detail. But inside the police department, the detectives knew one thing. No matter how strange, every crime has an answer, and they were determined to find it. Then, one detective noticed something strange. The lock on the door, though intact, had tiny scratches around the keyhole. Not the kind you'd expect from someone fumbling with their keys, but deliberate marks, faint, like someone had practiced, as if the lock had been picked, then re-secured. It was a small detail, but it cracked open a new possibility. What if the killer never left? What if they were still in the apartment when help arrived? Hiding, waiting, breathing the same air as the detectives while they examined the body. The thought chilled them to the bone. The apartment had been searched, yes, but what if they missed something? A crawl space? A hollow wall? The team searched again. Every inch. They tapped on walls, moved furniture, scanned for heat signatures. And then, behind a wardrobe in the bedroom, they found it. A narrow gap leading to a cavity between the walls. Inside, crumpled blankets, food wrappers, and the faint smell of sweat. Someone had been living there, watching Daniel, waiting. Suddenly, the impossible wasn't impossible anymore. The killer had picked the lock, slipped inside, and hidden in the walls. They waited until Daniel fell asleep, then emerged to strike. After the murder, they returned to their hiding spot, silent as the detectives combed the scene. When the apartment was finally left unattended, they slipped out and vanished. The discovery explained the mechanics, but not the motive. Why Daniel? Why stalk an ordinary man? Why orchestrate a murder so elaborate it bordered on madness? The police dug into Daniel's past, desperate for answers. And that's when they uncovered something he had kept hidden. A year earlier, Daniel had served as a juror in a high-profile case. A violent man stood accused of multiple crimes: extortion, assault, attempted murder. Daniel was one of the 12 who voted guilty, sending the man to prison for decades. At the time, Daniel thought it was over, justice served. But for some men, prison is not the end. It's only the beginning. The convict had connections, friends on the outside, and one of them had sworn vengeance on every juror who voted against him. Slowly, quietly, they began tracking names, addresses, routines. Daniel was not the first target, but he was the one who suffered the most horrifying fate. When the truth came out, the case finally had its explanation. But for the detectives who worked it, the memory lingered. That room, that silence, that feeling of standing at a place where the impossible had happened. They solved the riddle, yes, but the shadow it left behind, that would never fade. Because in the end, the most terrifying murders are not the ones we can't explain. They're the ones we can.